here's what our goal is that we want to accomplish in the make model year. We want to effectively have what we call dependent drop-downs. So the idea behind this particular code customization is, let's say, for example, if you wanted to select a make first, like a vehicle make, and then once you have made that selection, what the application does, it gives you a choice to select the second item in that list, which is in this case the model. But the model is specific to the first item that was selected. So in this case, since the first item was Mercedes, the list of models that are shown are specific to that particular make. And then once you've selected that, a third drop-down becomes available, and that is the year. Now, obviously, this particular one is for make model year. It's 3 levels, but you can, in fact, go through and do many more levels if you want, or just 2 levels, or whatever in between, effectively. Now, let's look at that's what we want to accomplish. Now, let's look at what our database schema looks like. In this particular case, what we have are 2 tables that one contains the owner, and the owner, in this particular case, for this example, we've kept this very simple. It's got a primary key, which is an ID, and it's got a owner name and address, effectively. And that's where we are keeping track of all of the owners of the vehicle. Then we have a vehicle type database. This particular database has a primary key, which is an ID. And then we have essentially a list of all of the vehicles that are in our database, the combination of make, model, year that makes sense. So for example, if we have a Honda Accord 2005, 2006, and so on and so forth. So the vehicle type database contains a list of all of the data that is available, that is a valid data for make, model, year. And finally, we have what we call is a many-to-many table. And in this particular case, the many-to-many table, what it does, it essentially matches an owner to a vehicle type. So that's the reason why it contains 2 fields, and only 2 fields. First of them is the owner ID, which points back to the ID field in the owner table. And the second one is the vehicle type ID, which points back to the ID field in the vehicle type. It's a many-to-many table. And both of those items combined make a primary key. So in this particular case, we have something called a composite primary key that combines the owner ID and the vehicle type ID together. Let's look at the data inside of the vehicle type table. So here is an example or a sampling of the data that is contained. So the first column is the ID, obviously, and the ID is a unique ID. And this is what is going to be stored in the many-to-many table. And then, of course, you've got the make, model, and the year for the specific make, model, and year that we can have in our database. So that's what we need to do. Now, let's talk about the strategy that we need to accomplish over here in order to make this code customization. It's a fairly simple and straightforward code customization. The number of functions we might add may be more, like about 6 or 7, but at the end of the day, it's a fairly straightforward code customization. This particular code customization requires both the layout customization as well as some code that you need to add in the code behind files as well. And in terms of the layout specifically, and we'll talk about the code customization in a minute, in terms of the layout specifically, what we will need to do is we will need to add the make and model drop-down controls using code generation tags. And we will also need to set the page properties for the new code generation tags that we have added. That's what our strategy is. And let's go through and first make the layout customization, and then we will come back and actually do the actual customizations on the code side. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Iron Speed Designer and actually make those code customizations on a new page here. These slides are available to you so that you can actually go through and follow along later on when you need to. But let me switch over to Iron Speed Design over here. And I'm going to go to a specific page here called Add Owner Webinar. And I'm going to look at the specific page here. And if you notice, what happens is in the live preview, what is shown here is a master detail page, where the master record at the top is the owner record, and the many-to-many record is shown at the bottom, which is the owner vehicles, because each owner may have multiple vehicles. We want to display the list of vehicles at the bottom. Now, if I click on the add row button over here, what I see is essentially only one drop-down, and the one drop-down contains the vehicle type. And if I click the drop-down, you will see a lot of duplicates over there. This is the default page that has been created by NSP Designer, and it contains essentially one for each ID. It's basically assuming that the first field in the table, the make, is actually what is going to be used as a display foreign key as. So that's why you see a number of duplicates, even though underneath the hood, this particular Acura's ID would be different than the second line's Acura ID effectively. So anyway, what we need to do here is that change this so that this allows us to essentially select the make first. Then you've got the model drop down on the right-hand side, and then the year drop down on the right of that. And that the combination of those three identify the specific vehicle that this particular owner owns, and that's what we need to accomplish over here. So what I'm going to do is switch back to the design mode over here, and one of the things that you will see in the design mode is that you've got essentially a table, a list of controls that are shown on the page panels. You will see, of course, the header and the menu, and then you've got an owner record control, which is the control that is shown at the top, which is the master record, if you will. And it contains, obviously, the owner name and address. Now, the specific control that we want to change is the child table control that is shown below, and that is called the owner vehicle table control over here. And specifically within that, we are not interested in the filters of the buttons area, but we are interested in the editable table area. Now, by default, as we saw earlier in the live preview, all we see is a vehicle type drop-down that is shown over there. And if you look at the bottom of this screen, you will see that this particular row, or excuse me, this particular cell contains a code generation tag in the cell editor. And this particular code generation tag says gen::field value name equal vehicle type ID. Now, just a little brief background on code generation tags. Code generation tags are really temporary tags. These are essentially tags that allow you to essentially bind a particular control to to make it into essentially a data-bound control. So you can effectively say, hey, I've got a control here called vehicle type ID, and this essentially corresponds to a certain field in the database, and it's going to be a drop-down list. The code generation tags are only temporary. They will get eliminated and replaced with this specific .NET controls. So you might see an ASP: drop-down list in the ASPX file. None of the code generation tags will stay put in the ASPX file. So these are only for convenience and are helpful, especially when you're trying to map database fields into essentially user interface controls. That's the purpose of these tags. So what I need to do here is, what I'd like to do is add a couple more fields in addition to the vehicle type ID. I want to have the make and the model as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch over to my Word document and just cut and paste. This is all described over here, and you'll have access to this after this webinar. Brooke will email you the link to this particular document and a zip file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the code generation tags that I have in this document, and I'm just going to simply paste it over here and replace this particular one. So you will see that now I've got three make, model, and vehicle type ID, three different gen::field value tags over here. Now if I go back and click over here, you will see that the quick layout gets updated with the names of the specific gen tags that are being used over here. Now at this particular time, what I would like to do now is, now that I've added a couple of new code generation tags, I need to actually specify what do they correspond to, what field do they correspond to from the database. So towards that, what I will need to do is go to the page properties dialog box and bind them. But before I do that, this vehicle type ID field is not named properly, obviously, because that's what it started out as. So what I'd like to do is right mouse click on this one and select rename, and rename this to a new name. In this particular case, I want to use year. So I'm going to go ahead and rename that, and now I've got 3 code generation tags. And notice that when I rename it over here, it also renames it in the cell editor at the bottom as well. Now, if I double-click on the make, it opens up what's called the Page Properties dialog box. And the Page Properties dialog box has a number of tabs at the top. And you will see the first one of them is the Display tab. We want to first go to the Bindings tab. And in this particular case, what we want to do is we want to say that the user interface control called make really is the same as vehicle type ID over here. So fill it with data from the vehicle type ID. It corresponds to the vehicle type ID field in the database. And I go back to the Display tab, and I say the way that I want this control displayed is not as a literal, but as a drop-down list. Those are the only 2 changes I need to make to the make, and then I want to do the same set of changes to the model. So I'm going to go to the model, select the drop-down list, go to the bindings, select vehicle type ID, and repeat this for the year as well. So I go ahead and select vehicle type ID, come back to the display, and select drop-down list. Once I've made these changes, I'm just going to go ahead and press the OK button over here, and let's quickly check to see what exactly has RNSP Designer done as part of this thing by switching over to live preview. And what you will notice is that now 3 different drop-downs have been added, and you will notice that in the new row that I have added over here. And these 3 drop-downs are showing up here with make, model, and year. Except since we haven't made any code customizations, the actual population of these things will be exactly the same, and it will contain a lot of duplicates. So just like this drop-down has all of the list of, in this case, makes and a lot of duplicates, and this one as well as the third one as well. So basically what we have done at this point in time is just made the layout customizations. Now what we need to do is switch over in order to make code customizations, in order to make sure that we populate each one of these drop-downs with their specific things. Like, for example, the first one should be make, second one model, and the third one to be year. So let's switch back a little bit to the PowerPoint slides, and then we'll come back to RNSP Designer here. And skip through the examples over here. Okay, now let's talk about the strategy for our code customizations. So what we need to do is that we've got 3 drop-downs, make, model, and year. For the first 2 drop-downs, what we need to do is make two sets of changes. The first set of changes that we need to make is to make sure that whenever a user selects a particular item, we want to be called back to the server so that we have an opportunity to populate the next drop-down. So if the user selects the first drop-down, the make, as let's say Honda, we want to make sure that the second drop-down gets populated with the specific models that are manufactured by Honda. Well, in order to do that, we need to do 2 things. We need to set what's called the auto postback property to true. And what this does is that it allows you to essentially be called back whenever a user changes or selects a different value. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to specify a handler. So now we're going to be called back. Okay, then great. So now what we need to do is be able to say what is going to be called back. Well, the what is going to be the selected index changed handler. This particular function, we will need to implement it and basically say, aha, this should do the following. Like, for example, in this particular case, what we want to do is call the populate method. Now, we need to do it for the make and the model. We don't need to do it for the year drop-down. And the reason for that is once you select the year, there is no further selection or no further drop-down that needs to be populated. So we don't need to be called back home on our server when a modification is made to the year. If the user selects 2009, we don't need to be called back at that particular point in time. Only when the user presses the save button, that's when we will retrieve that value. But until the save button is clicked, we don't need to be called home. So that's the reason why we only need to make the changes to the make and the model drop-downs for the set auto postback property. So that's the first step. The second step is this needs to be done for all three of the drop-downs. What we need to do is we need to write what are called the populate methods in order to essentially populate each one of the drop-downs with the specific things that we want in that drop-down. So for example, in the case of make, obviously we want to have a unique set of values for the make. So that's what we want to accomplish. And let me just go through and kind of give you a quick overview in terms of the different classes and the different controls that we have. If you notice, for example, that we on the right-hand side, on the upper right, you will see a hierarchical view of the sample set of controls that are created for a table page. So in this particular case, we generate three different classes shown in yellow over here, one corresponding to the page, one to the table control, and one to the row control. So in effect, the many-to-many table that you see is essentially the table control class. And what we are going to do is we're going to make code customization at the row level, not at the table control, not at the page level, because it allows us to make those customizations at a very specific level and makes it very easy for us to make those changes. On the left-hand side, you will see what it corresponds to. It corresponds to essentially a row within the table. Now, just as another way of background, what you will notice is that, by the way, these pictures are available in what is called the code customization tutorial. If you go to our knowledge base and search for tutorial, the first link will have that is the code customization tutorial. And about 10 minutes of time on reading that thing will save you countless hours, because it explains kind of the code that we generate and the list of functions that we generate. So specifically in this case, you will notice that the calling hierarchy for that particular type of page will first call the control init method at the row level, which is where we are going to initialize the auto postback property. And then eventually it calls the populate field drop-down list methods for each one of the fields that are contained on that page. So those are the two methods that we are going to customize. So with that, let me switch over and start making some modifications in IronSpeed Designer. So I'm going to switch over to design mode. And specifically what I'm going to do at this point in time is go to the right mouse click over here, and I'm going to go to the code menu here. And since we talked about adding it to the table control row class, and specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the init method in order for us to customize or in order to set our postback. So I select this, and what it will do is it will insert for me a blank function here in the controls file. And at this point in time, what I just need to do is fill in the specific things that I need to do here. I'm going to switch over to my Word document because I have code. I'm just going to copy and paste this. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is simply copy the guts of this function. And I'll explain to you what it does in a second here. Okay. So what this set of things do is, as you will notice, the first thing it does is it sets the auto postback flag for the make and the model drop-downs. And then once it has done that, it adds a handler to say, please call the selected index change method, which we haven't written yet, whenever a make is changed. And whenever a model is changed, it's going to call the model underscore selected index change function in order to essentially do the additional work. Finally, one last thing before we are done is what we want to do is we want to disable the model and the year drop-downs unless and until the make is selected by the user. So at this point in time, we only want to leave the make drop-down as enabled. By the way, all of this that I'm showing you is standard.NET because this is a drop-down control. So the auto postback, the add handler for the selected index change, and the enabled flags are all standard.NET properties and standard.NET mechanisms in order to accomplish what you need to do. So now that we have done these particular, the init handler, what we need to do is we need to write the make and the model selected index changed methods. And again, let me copy it from the Word document, and then what I will do is I will explain it to you in a minute. The selected index change ones are fairly straightforward. All they do is they will, so in the case of the make selected index change, what it does is it essentially now says, let me go ahead and enable the next drop-down, in this particular case, the model. And what I want to do is I want to now populate the model drop-down list. So that's all the job of the whenever a make is selected, we enable the next drop-down, and then we also populate that drop-down. And similarly, there will be one for the model, which now in this particular case essentially propagates it to the next level. In this case, it enables the year, and then it essentially goes through and populates the year drop-down so that once the model is selected, the year now is populated so we can select that for that specific vehicle. Okay, so now that we have done the first part of the code customization that we wanted to make, which is that we wanted to be called home whenever a user selects a make, we want it to be called so that we can enable the model and populate it. And whenever the user selects a model, we want it to be called home whenever the user changes the model. Okay, we have called home, but what we haven't done is we haven't written the populate model, the populate year, as well as the populate make methods, because we wanted to essentially eliminate the duplicates and only show, for every make, only show one entry for that. So how do we do that? Well, we need to write the three different populates, the populate make, populate model, and the populate year. So again, I'm going to copy it from the code, from my Word document over here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain that to you. Now, these are large functions, so it's in about 25, 30 lines over here, but don't be scared. They are fairly simple and straightforward, and there is a lot of documentation that goes along with it. So let's now look at the populate make dropdown that we've got over here. This is the first one that we are populating. Well, what we need to do is when we populate these things, what we want to make sure is that we are only showing the specific makes one at a time effectively. So the first thing that we need to do is set up a where clause. And in this particular case, what we are effectively saying is that we actually don't really need to specify any specific where clause because we want to read all of the entries in that vehicle type database table. All we need to do is we need to add an order by clause, and because what we want to do is effectively bring it all into the same order as in this case, alphabetical. So what we will do is we'll do an order by add vehicle type table.make, and we want to do it in ascending order, basically. Next things that we need to do is we need to just do some housekeeping. We need to clear any previous items that were there, basically. And then this is where we need to read data from the database. So what we will do is we'll call getRecords, and the getRecords method basically takes a few arguments. The first one is a where clause, which in this case is going to be blank. The second one is an order by. And the third one is a specific page number and the maximum number of items returned per call. So, for example, let's say there are 10 million vehicles, as an example, in our vehicle type table. Well, what we want to do is we don't want to read all 10 million in one shot. What we want to read is maybe 100 at a time, effectively, and then repeat this process until we have read all of them and populated our list. Now, obviously, if there are 10 million items, maybe there are more efficient ways of doing it. But for the purpose of this example, I think this will suffice. So what we do is we put this into a do loop, for loop effectively over here, and we will effectively get records, a maximum number of items. Let's say this is 100 at a time. And then for each record that is retrieved in this record, we'll create a new list item, which is effectively what drop-down lists in Microsoft.NET Framework contain. So the new list item in this case is going to have the display name is going to be the make, but also the value that is stored is also going to be the make, because we are going to use this value later on in order to populate the model. And then what we want to do here is we want to make sure that they are unique. So the way that we make sure that they are unique is we say if the list already does not contain that particular item, then we'll go ahead and add it to that list. So that's as simple as what it takes in order to essentially populate the make dropdown. There's a little bit of housekeeping that we need to do, which is we need to see if there's a selected item, basically, and we need to set a selected item. And then eventually what we need to do is we need to disable and clear other dropdowns. So in this particular case, if the make changes, we want to make sure that the model dropdown and the year dropdown are cleared up so that there are no values there and they are disabled, because unless the make is selected, you don't want to have the model available over here. So that's all that it takes in order to essentially populate the dropdown here. Now, this same process is going to be repeated for the other two dropdowns. Let's copy and paste that code. And that particular code will look exactly the same as the previous one with very few minor changes. So now let's look at the model. In the case of the model, the only difference that we want to do here is that we want to add a where clause. What is the where clause that we want to add? We want to make sure that in the case of models, we're only retrieving those models that are specific to the make that was selected in the first dropdown. So in this case, let's see what I do. I do a AND clause. I AND that clause. The specific left-hand side column is the make. I specify an operator. And then finally, I specify the value that I'm going to use. In this particular case, is the make dropdown dot selected value. So that's the AND clause that I need to specify. And of course, I need to order by the model, so that is shown in alphabetical order. And then the rest of the code is exactly the same. You basically have a loop where we are reading all of the values. The only difference in this particular case is that I am actually checking for the model dropdown and make sure that there are not any duplicates over there. And finally, I have a selected value, and then I insert a please select item, and then finally I clear the year dropdown. In this case, I don't need to create the make or the model at this point in time. By the way, since I copied and pasted it, this was from an old my app 35. This is the name of the application over here, so I need to make that one last change. Otherwise, I will not get the proper value there. Okay, so I've done this for model, and I need to repeat the same thing for the year dropdown. And again, I will copy that and paste it. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is, if you notice here, is I have two where clauses, one for the make that was selected in the make dropdown, and one for the model that was selected in the model dropdown, basically. And then the rest of the code is exactly the same, but the only difference is it now populates the year dropdown as opposed to the make and the model. And similarly, it goes through. In this particular case, there are no other dropdowns to disable or clear other dropdowns because year is the last one that is available. I go ahead and make the save. I switch over to my ASPX page. I go to the live preview, and what live preview should do is recompile the application, and hopefully, if I haven't made any mistakes, it should allow me to now go through and display the make model year sample. Okay, there you have it. So the first thing you will notice is the model and the year are disabled. Only the make is available at this particular point in time. When I click on the make, I get a unique set of all of the vehicle makes that are available. So let's say I select Honda. So as soon as I select Honda, notice what happens is that it posts back to the server, and now it enables some second dropdown, in this case the model dropdown. And if you look at the model dropdown, what I will notice is that the specific models that belong to Honda are shown over here. And if I select Accord, the year dropdown becomes available, and now I have the ability to select a particular year that goes along with it. Now notice that what happens if I go back and change it to Toyota, for example, now my models change to Toyota, and I can now select Toyota Camry, and my year becomes available for that, basically, so now that I have that. So that's basically the formal part of this presentation in terms of implementing a make model year. Very straightforward code customization that you need to do. and I'll be glad to, at this point in time, take your questions. I already see a few lined up over here, and let me see if I can answer them for you.